while. Well, history is fine.
Okay. Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2.
So earlier, the videos didn't have audio. So I was like, not sure
This morning, yeah.
why just those two things didn't have the videos.
Back there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought it was just gonna be a picture because I just wanted the picture up so I could.
Oh, the 2 videos? No, I know exactly why it didn't work. It was, I just didn't do Pro Presenter changed some of its settings and I forgot to make it so that it would have sound. Okay, well, let's open with prayer. Father, thank you so much for tonight. We pray that we'd have great presentations, great discussions, and so that we could all grow in our knowledge and grow in wisdom, and that we could recognize that these things come from you, and we're grateful for that. So please bless our evening, and we'll have a great discussion in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, I think we're good. First up is Chris. And so no, the first up is Matt.
No, sorry, okay.
Yeah.
So I think Sean's gonna first talk
Okay.
before the things. I think it's gonna be like a minute. And
Yeah.
then I can just respond to that and respond to it from last week.
Sounds good.
And then Chris can go, and then I'll do my presentation.
Sure.
Can we have the paper thing? So we can write
Oh,
it?
yes. Yeah.
I think that's.
You want to go get it?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
You may or may not use it. So.
Okay. All right. So the word of the day today is Hermeneutic Circle. Did some reading on this, and the first thing that came into mind, well, first of all, the Hermetic Circle, it describes the process of understanding a text hermeneutically. It refers to the idea that one's understanding of the text as a whole is established by reference to the individual parts or the parts that make up the whole of each individual part with reference to the whole. So basically, for example, the way I understood it is that if I write a letter saying we're going to have a party for Christmas, and I write it to a person, and then they read certain parts of the letter, can have a greater understanding of the whole, what the letter is about, by dissecting or interpreting it just by reading a sentence or two from it. It's taking specific vocabulary words from it and getting an idea of what the letter is about. And then kind of going back and reading the whole letter and see if that matches. That's the way I understood it. And then if another person reads that same letter, they might have a different interpretation of what that letter is and how they interpret the sentence or a word.
Spell the word, Sean.
Sorry?
Spell the word.
Hermeneutically, Hermeneuticaly.
It should be under.
Yeah. Hermeneutic. Hermeneutic Circle.
You know what I'm thinking.
Oh, yes, I know.
Yeah. So another
That's
thing,
his middle name,
Yeah.
Herman.
yeah. Or it's like taking a whole recipe. That's another way I understand it. It's like if somebody writes a recipe, the author of that recipe knows the final outcome of what's going to be cooked. So as somebody who is preparing the meal, they might take an instruction and kind of understand what the whole recipe is going to be about or what is going to be produced from that one line. Just by doing investigating, interpreting, investigations and everything else, and they can come to an understanding of what the whole picture is of, or what the whole product's going to be. And I think also like skimming something over, like skimming a paragraph and kind of picking certain words from that paragraph and getting an idea of what the whole paragraph's going to be telling you. That's pretty much where I'm getting from here. But it was actually discovered by Martin Heidegger. He developed the concept of the Hermetic Circle to envision a whole in terms of a reality that was situated in a detailed experience of everyday existence by an individual or the parts. So the understanding was developed on the basis of the four structures of understanding that allow external phenomena to be interpreted in a preliminary way. Okay, so that's pretty much right. Okay, so but basically, like my understanding of what it is, right, is this: you have a letter, take a sentence from it, and you can actually get an idea of what the whole picture is by interpreting and what it is. And that's pretty much it. I hope that made sense. So, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, no problem. First time. First time.
It's a very, there's why I think this word, I think it's very useful to really discuss it. Did you get a marker? Sorry, yeah, here. Oh, no. Or look at his horse.
At the end of the day, do you know what a circle is? I've heard the answers.
Yes.
I know what a permit is. That's not a good thing.
You gotta see how we interpret scriptures.
Well, that's the one class.
Okay, so usually when we're thinking about interpretation, okay, the mistake that a lot of people make, it may not even really be a mistake. There's different ways to interpret the text, right? And everything you said is right? So the hermeneutical circle, it's a concept that can be applied in almost any circumstance, whether it's interpreting a recipe, interpreting the Bible, interpreting my experience with the world, right? So it can be applied to almost any context. But for our purposes, what I want to kind of point out is that a lot of people, particularly Christians, they make the mistake of always thinking that, I guess I'll ask you guys, like, where is the message? where do we actually get the biblical message from? Do we get it from the author? Do we get it from the text? Or do we somehow get it from ourselves? Any thoughts?
I think you get it from yourself by reading the text that the author did. So it's a little bit of everything.
You're right. You're definitely right. And that's the whole point of the circle. So the question is really, what is, we're talking about parts and whole, right? One sentence or one word could be part of a sentence. One sentence can be part of a paragraph, part of a book. But there's a broader whole, right? And the broader whole is really, well, for Heidegger, it'd be the entire horizon of history, right? So the whole is everything. So you can look at the text or the Bible and take the message itself, okay? If you're a biblical historian, you might be more interested in maybe the intentions of the author, right? If you're more of a postmodernist, and you believe that all, interpretation is a matter of subjectivity or whatever, it's all about yourself, right? Each on their own are wrong, but you really need, to really have a more of a robust understanding of a text, you really got to be asking questions about the intention of the author, and then what the Bible or the book actually says. Because sometimes the Bible or any text can say something that's different from the author, right? And saying, and that's because, when you're reading a text, you're bringing your own assumptions, your own worldview, your own understanding of the world in your interpretation of the text, right? So what we have here, we have somebody, say, back in history with their own assumptions, their own worldview that might not correspond to ours, right? Does anybody have any questions about this sort of issue here?
Just quick. So, hermeneutical analysis typically also includes a discussion of the history and events surrounding the author of the text and the individual as well. Right?
It may or may not include that.
Okay.
So, hermeneutics in Heidegger's sense is not just related to texts. It's about interpreting the world around us, which he would say is being, right? So the beings of the world around us disclose themselves to us, right? So it's for a broader kind of concept of interpretation, right? That extends beyond the text. Anybody else have any thoughts or any comments?
Go ahead.
I was going to say, so the initial, the author, the original author, his thought process never changes, because what he wrote on paper is what he believed at that moment in his life. They say, for example, like the Gospels, right? And, they wrote the Gospels based on what they were experiencing at that time. And 2,000 years later, you were reading the same thing, but you might have a different interpretation. But could they get it wrong?
Well, they could be mistaken. Well, there's various things. They could be mistaken, or they're being truthful. They're not disclosing their truth in a propositional way, like how you and I'd say, hey, the sky's blue, right? They could use mythology, they can use allegory. There's lots of literary devices. So one of the biggest questions, I think, and sorry, I'll get to you in a minute, in history in general is is it possible for us, because a lot of people say we have to reconstruct history for us to understand text. The question is, how can we reconstruct history in its pure form when we are so distant from history and our experience is so foreign to the ancient world of understanding? How is it possible for us to jump back in time, which is essentially the expectation? So if you're a historian, you got to seriously wrestle with that, because I don't think we can't jump into the minds of the author, right? So what we have, and I think the more Christian perspective, we'll go, okay, we have the biblical message. Because here's another question. We have God, right? Is God's intentions always lined up with the intentions of the author? I don't think so. The author could have one intention, but God's message can be different from that intention, right?
To play off what you and Sean are saying, I think that Sean was getting at a lot of a very deep kind of issue. I think he
were asking, Sean, like, I'm sorry if you weren't, but it's basically like how, as you were just saying right there, how does misaligning happen in where, you know, how do we find ourselves in an ancient Greek world and we then lose ourselves from that world and then find some other new world? How does it misaligning between the old world and the new world and change things? And that, how does that actually happen in the understanding of being?
Right.
It's a very tough question to think about.
Yeah, like, so are you asking how is it actually possible for us to jump into the worldview of the author?
Well, why exactly? To how you were saying it, why exactly does our intentions and God's intentions misalign?
Right. Okay, so if you're asking a theological question, which wasn't, you know, my intention to get into, I don't necessarily think it's problematic for God's intentions and the author's intentions to be misaligned, because I don't think it's necessarily a problem because from God's view, he is an infinite God disclosing the truth to finite human beings, right? So inevitably, there's going to be misunderstanding. There's going to be misaligned intentions, right? But, you know, the goal of reading a text, is it really to conceptually understand what the intentions are, right? Or is the goal of reading a text to inform our worldview and enable us to see the world in more nuanced and different ways, right? So is really the goal just to understand what somebody thought a long time ago, or is the goal to transform our understanding of the world today, right? So, yeah, and this is the circle. Like, here's us, or me, or anybody, right? And here, let's just say tradition, because and tradition can be represented symbolically, I guess, by the church. There's a sense in which our experience of the world transforms our understanding of tradition or the text or whatever it is you're interpreting. And then this tradition, it informs our interpretation, but our interpretation transforms our worldview and our assumptions, right? So this is the circular motion, right? And it's important to hold the two in place. And so I want to take a few minutes just to kind of segue into comments about last week's presentation, or the presentations last week. And first of all, I thought that your presentation on kitsch was really well done. It was a lot more developed than I expected. Like, for me, when I said, oh, you do kitsch, I pretty much expected you to just come up here and say, oh yeah, kitsch is just bad art, right? I didn't expect you to go into the ideological implications of kitsch, about capitalism, whatever, you know. So I thought that was really good, and it's good for us to get exposure to that. John's presentation. So here's a question I have for you. Like, obviously Nietzsche and Otto Dix, he's not a particularly Christian guy, right? So, you know, what are we, and presumably most of us, maybe not all of us, but most of us probably disagree with Nietzsche, right? As far as I'm concerned, you know, like his philosophy tries to turn himself into God, right? Since displacing God with himself, or the Superman, right? So I guess my question to you guys, like, what do we do with people that we disagree with?
Unfriend them.
That's one way to go about it. I'm just going to quickly grab my coffee.
Delete.
Depends who we are, how we would respond to that. Some people would discredit them, some people would mock them, and she's kind of discrediting, ignore them, or maybe some people would listen to them and try to know.
What would you do?
Me? I go, they're crazy.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, hey, you know, it's.
You can agree to disagree.
Yeah.
At most things.
Yeah.
Right?
Conversational.
Yeah.
But at first, I would try to understand where they're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And then if I still don't agree, I'll just say I will agree to disagree.
Yeah. Okay, here's a question. Do you guys think we should be afraid of ideas that are different from ours? Who here thinks that we should be afraid? Raise your hand. Oh, okay. Well, that's really good. Yeah.
We've got ideas in this church that are different than most
Yeah.
denominations.
Yeah, and you're right. And you know what? So if this is not an academic setting, but if this were at university, and if I was a Christian at university and I was engaging with something like Nietzsche, I know exactly what I would do. You look at Nietzsche, okay? You look at the traditions. He's not a church, but he has his own traditions. He has his own way of seeing the world, and because he's one man, it's always limited. So even if he has a powerful assessment of Christianity or a powerful critique of Christianity, it's likely the case he's only critiquing one particular tradition of Christianity. Nietzsche, he was German, and he brought up in a German sort of Lutheran tradition. Okay, so maybe his critique, if you accept it, maybe it's viable against a Protestant German Lutheran sort of tradition. But do you think it can respond to Catholicism? Could it respond to Eastern Orthodoxy? Right? So when we're being critical of ideas, it's important to look at your own traditions and say, hey, okay, so maybe there are deficiencies in my understanding of a particular tradition. Can I go to another Christian tradition and appropriate insights that could challenge? Right? And the reason why I'm having this conversation is because, a lot of people, particularly the young people, they're kind of leaving the church in droves. I don't know if you guys noticed that. I'm no sociologist, but my theory behind it is that a lot of young people, they go to church and it's kind of, it doesn't always have the intellectual rigor behind it. So when they go to university, they encounter people like Nietzsche, they encounter people like Hume or whatever, and they just think, oh, these arguments are really compelling. I never thought of them before. So they think, well, faith is something that's naive, it's simplistic, right? And I think a part of the reason is because the churches in general are kind of doing a disservice to the young people. They're not servicing younger people who want to have an academic education, right? So personally for me, I think that Christianity has the intellectual sort of heritage to be competitive in, if you want to say, the marketplace of ideas, and that's why I think it's great that we have an opportunity here to discuss that. So any last thoughts?
I think you're exactly, just to comment on that, young people who are, there's plenty of young people who are just into partying and all that nonsense, right? But there's also young people, like some of you, right, who want an academic education, but also pursuing ideas that are different than what you were told growing up or learned before. And I think there are plenty of churches who would be very against something like this group because we're talking about things that disagree with faith and Christianity. But we're not doing it in order to lead people away from faith or God. We're doing it to show people that you can be a Christian and you can be a person of faith and yet still be analyzing and not embracing, what's the word I'm looking for, like expose yourself to all kinds of ideas. And some of those ideas might be garbage, some of them might be great and life-changing. And if we can expose people to stuff like that, I think that's great.
Yeah.
Just at Dan's point, especially with Nietzsche, because Nietzsche is one of the most important and prominent philosophers that we've come across. So you have to understand his ideas.
Right. Nietzsche, and as I encourage atheists, a lot of atheists, when they're thinking about their atheism, like they need to appeal to intellectual atheists who actually know a thing or two, especially knowing a thing or two about Christianity. And Nietzsche is great because he studied Christianity, he knows it, he engaged with it. And a lot of Christians, people like Richard Dawkins, I don't know if you guys know him, but Christopher Hitchens is sort of new age or new whatever, Four Horsemen of Atheism or whatever. If you listen to their arguments and they're complete garbage. And what's sad is that a lot of people are convinced by them. Right? A lot of people are transformed by them. They don't know their stuff. But Nietzsche is somebody, he's scary in the sense that he knows Christianity really well, and he can critique it. One last comment I want to make is that Augustine, because obviously Christian thinkers have been kind of wrestling with this idea. How do you engage with non-Christian thinkers, whatever, throughout the history? I know I just have 1 minute. And he would use the analogy, spoil the Egyptians, what he would say. So when the Israelites left Egypt, they took with them the spoils of Egypt, right? And he used that because the early Christians, they used pagan philosophy to articulate their faith, right? And the same thing applies. Okay, let's take the best from these other worldviews that may be foreign to ours and spoil them like the Israelites spoiled the Egyptians, right? So
Just so everybody's clear, because I used the word spoiler earlier today. Not the same thing. Spoil in the sense of take it for
Taking.
yourself. Yeah.
claiming the spoils.
Yeah. Claiming the
Yeah.
spoils, yeah.
So anyway,
Good.
thanks.
Thank you. All right, so Chris, I have your presentation on the screen right now. So all you have to do is press down and up if you want to go back. Oops. Sorry, we'll try that again. There we go.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it should work.
Okay, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. I always appreciate your time. And let's begin. So this will be a presentation on the philosopher Plato. It's going to be about an allegory or an image that he kind of made up and that he talked at length about. So I'd like to start off with a simple question. I'd love to hear everyone's opinions about this. What is truth? What does the word true mean to us? And I'd love to hear, you can talk about it in a theoretical lens, you talk about it in a personal sense. What are some things that come to your mind when I say this word, truth?
Honesty.
Yeah, being honest. Right.
There's no lie,
Interesting.
no deception.
No deception, no deceit, no illusion. Right.
Sometimes something tangible.
It's something that you can grasp. It's something that is at hand with you. Right. That's interesting. That's a good comment. Anybody? John?
Corresponding to reality.
That's really cool. Thanks, John. That actually segues perfectly into the presentation that I'll be doing. So John said corresponding to reality. So this is one definition of truth that you can take. It's called truth as correctness or truth as correspondence. And the definition of it is that a statement is true if what it means and says is in accordance with the matter about which the statement is made. I'll explain what that means. So I can say that the coin is round. And, I can take a coin out. I don't have a coin on me right now, which kind of sucks. Wish I did. But take it out and I can say, the coin is round. And I then look at the coin and I say, wow, the coin is round. That means that my statement, my proposition matched or it corresponded to the state of affairs that was going on. Here's another example we can use at hand right now. The lights are on in the room. Well, the lights are on in the room. We can verify that. We can say, oh yes, the lights are on in the room. That's correct. If I was to say the statement, the lights are not on in the room, you can then say, oh wait, but they are on in the room. That means that's false. This is one definition of truth. Oh, so did you have a comment?
Which room?
Yeah. That's cool. That's a cool way of thinking about it. Yeah, that's very true. That's
You're so specific.
no, it's good kind of thinking though, because you're picking up on something. I think, Sean, you're picking up on, I can say a statement, and it can match or can correspond with the state of affairs, but that may not always be the case. It's kind of an interesting thing. So I can say that lights are on in the room. I can say that the robin is red. So an open question. Do you think that this is an adequate way of explaining this word truth? Do you think that it kind of says everything about the word truth? This way of my proposition must match or correspond to the state of affairs?
I don't think so.
Why?
Because my interpretation of the truth is what I believe,
Interesting.
and you might not believe that to be true.
Interesting. That's really good. That's really, really good. So now you're talking about opinions and beliefs,
Right.
which is where the book, The Republic, actually came from. This is the thing that generated the reason why Plato wrote the book called The Republic. He wrote it in 500 BC. And hopefully we can talk about that. So certainly it's possible. This may explain, all of what truth is. But could Plato's allegory of the cave, and we'll get into what that is, could that shed light on an open truth that does not shut itself up inside to a conclusion about itself? So here's Plato's allegory of the cave. And I thought that I'd actually read just a short snippet from The Republic, kind of explaining the situation that you see right now in this diagram or picture. One moment. Okay. So this is from the book The Republic. This is in book 7, by the way. So there was 6 books before this, and they were mainly it's a lot of stuff that they were on. Maybe we can talk a little bit about today of what those books were on. But this is book 7 of The Republic, and of course our good friend Socrates that we talked about a couple weeks ago. He is this guy who likes to go around the marketplace and question the state of affairs of things and ask people to say their opinions about stuff. And he's talking to someone named Glaucon. He's a friend of Socrates. So this is the analogy of the allegory of the cave. So picture people dwelling in an underground chamber, like a cave, with a long entrance, open to the light on its entire width. In this chamber, people are shackled at their legs and necks from childhood, so that they remain in the same spot and look only at what is in front of them, at what is present before them. Because of their shackles, they are unable to turn their heads. However, light reaches them from behind, from a fire burning higher up and at a distance, between the fire and the prisoners. Behind their backs runs a path along which a small wall has been built. And like a screen at puppet shows between the exhibitors and their audience, and above which they, the puppeteers, show their artistry. That was Socrates who said that. And Glaucon replies, I see. Socrates continues, imagine further that these people carrying all sorts of things along behind the screen, projecting above it, including figures of men and animals made of stone and wood, and all sorts of other man-made artifacts. Naturally, some of these people would be talking among themselves, and others would be silent. Glaucon says, a peculiar picture you have drawn, and peculiar prisoners. Socrates says, they are very much like us. Now tell me, do you think such people could see anything, whether on their own account or with the help of their fellows, except the shadows thrown by the fire on the wall of the cave opposite them? Glaucon says, how could they see anything else if they were prevented all their lives from moving their heads? Socrates says, and what about the things carried about behind them? Does not the same apply, that they see only shadows? Glaucon says, how could it be otherwise? Socrates says, now, if they were to talk with one another about what they see, don't you think that they would take this for real beings? Glaucon says, inevitably. And Socrates says, and if the wall of their prison opposite them reflected sound, don't you think that they would suppose, whenever one of the passers-by on the road spoke, that the voice belonged to the shadow passing before them? And Glaucon says, of course. So, just a quick recap. You have these prisoners that are shackled in this cave, and they've been shackled from birth. And they can't turn their heads. Their heads are locked into only looking in the front of them. And behind them are these artifacts, is what Socrates says. These artifacts, that are moving, and they're projecting from this fire behind these artifacts. And then that then projects on top of this wall that the shadows are cast on. But behind this fire, even more strange, is going to be this mouth of the cave that has light coming through it. And that is, you can make an ascent upwards towards where that person standing on the right, the light, the sun, the overworld. Does anyone have any questions, by the way, on are you guys clear on the allegory here? Yeah.
So if the prisoners are supposed to be everyday people, who are the shadow makers in society? That are essentially deluding the rest of us.
The politicians. I totally see where you're coming from, Matt. But I would advise to steer away from thinking about the artifacts. Even though Socrates does say puppeteers, which is interesting. So I totally see where you're coming from. But there's also something that is I guess that I actually, to go back on what I'm saying, I think that you actually have a good interpretation that you could definitely say it's the politicians or someone like that, right? Yeah, exactly. It's a good question. It's a good question, right? Yeah.
They're the jesters of the cave.
Yeah, exactly. The kind of jesters of the cave, John.
Yeah, I guess kind of what you're saying is basically like the allegory would still be, it would be sufficient without the puppet masters, because you could sort of have a setup with the way that sort of have the ancient Greek plays, or a sort of theater setup would be with a jar, with the figures, the shadows, and they just spin the jar. So you don't even necessarily need the puppeteers to make the allegory work.
Right.
Kind of why yours.
I totally agree with that, but I also see where Matt's coming as well, in terms of asking kind of about the people relations that involve this allegory. We can definitely talk about that, because that is a very prominent thing. I mean, this is the whole thing that Plato's doing. He's wanting to find a way for the state or the police in ancient Greek to basically, he's trying to find people who can rule the state. But yeah, that was a good question, Matt, for sure. So there's 4 stages that this allegory takes, and we'll go through all of them. And basically, what Socrates does is that he will now, using this allegory of the cave, he'll now come up with thought experiments about the prisoner and what happens to the prisoner, to prove some really amazing point that I want to try to get at the heart of today. So the very first stage will be the life in the cave. So he said, Socrates says, if the prisoners were able to talk to one another,
wouldn't you think that they would call what they saw real? Then the prisoners would in every way believe that the true ta'alethes is nothing other than the shadows of those artifacts. So I'm going to ask another general question I'd love to hear everyone's opinion on. It's, what is an everyday example that we face of, say, seeing shadows in front of us and not the real things that are there for us to see? Is there any examples that people can come up with? Dan?
I don't want to get too deep.
Yeah, it's good.
The nature of the group. I happen to believe that a lot of our hangups and a lot of our bad habits or the way we treat people has a lot to do with how we were raised, and not just how you were raised. I mean, how your parents treated you and how other adults treated you, and the trauma that you may or may not have gone through. So that's informing so much of how you treat people. And so people can look at how you treat people and say, well, he's either a good person or, like, people see the outside, but there's so much underneath that is informing why they the way they are. Right?
That's really good. So a question I have, let's take a person, we can definitely use an example of someone like a jerk, someone who is, always angry at other people. But I'm going to try a different example, but keep in mind what Dan just said. So imagine that you go to a jewelry store and you buy a gold ring. And let's say that the jewelry store owner, thinks that the gold ring that he's selling to you is 100% pure gold. And how do we know it's pure gold? Well, it has the atomic number 49. And so let's say that the jewelry owner thought that this gold ring was gold, but it wasn't actually in reality. So let's say that then you buy this gold ring, and then you then go to your friends. Oh, look at the gold ring I have. Look at what I have. This person believes that the ring is gold, but in actuality, it's not. Now, here's an interesting thing. I have a couple of questions with this analogy. One is, can we say that this person is living an illusion? Can we say that this person is living a hoax? Or is that how we should label this situation? What are your guys' thoughts on that?
Well, that's his truth.
That's an interesting thing to say, because you're saying that is exactly where I want to go with this conversation. It's that kind of situation where this person had a bad upbringing, and that they are, let's say they're just really people who will bug other people, or they'll try to torment other people, or that person, we only, as you mentioned, we can only see that from an external point of view, but from within their world and how they're operating, they basically think that they are enacting out their own truth. And that's an interesting thing to get into, because, again, are we meant to, what is that? What exactly is when someone acts out their own truth in a way that is not adhered to an external point of view that can see from above and say, no, that's incorrect, that you should not be acting like that, you should not be comporting yourself like that. What exactly is that?
My understanding is that, according to evolutionary theory, for example, it's not that we perceive the world exactly as it is, but more so what is the most beneficial to us and our survival and our thriving. That's what our mind evolved to be. I just learned about that last week, actually, about like, that's more so what our mind evolved to be than being something that accurately perceives the world, or does it perceive the world in such a way that will give you an advantage, if you will.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
people grow up, and if they're, even if from an objective outside perspective, you say this person is a jerk, or this person needs help, or this, it works for them on some level, otherwise they wouldn't live that way. That's not an objective thing, that's a very subjective thing. It works for them in unconsciously in some way.
Sorry, what's your name?
Tanasha.
Tanasha?
What did you say? T.
T. That's cool. That's
Did I get it right? Yeah, Tanasha. Yeah.
I really like what you said, that they are living out their own truth. And that is indeed correct to me, because we normally think that this person is living in some distortion of reality or some illusion in reality. And this is what we would normally try to do when we take the cave analogy and say, oh, that person is just seeing the shadows. But then what are the shadows? Are we to say that the shadows are, that we're literally supposed to negate them out of existence, that they're literally just nothing, they're null, that they have no...
That's their truth.
Exactly.
Their truth.
So the real question is, we have to understand what that person is doing, because that will reflect how we ourselves look at us. We have to see, and I'll try to make an argument today, and I hope I can do it right, that basically what is more manifest for them? In other words, what is more tangible to them? They are, in a way, they don't understand that, they don't see that they are, that reality is, or that reality can be unhidden from themselves. And I'll try to unpack that and say, like, what does that mean? That they are not able to see that reality is unhidden for themselves. Yeah. So that's life in the cave. We see that these prisoners are believing that the true things are none other than these shadows, as T said, that they're living their own truth. So this is going to be phase 2. Socrates now tries to think of another thought experiment that we could do with these prisoners. And this is what he says. I'll read this quote, but he basically thinks about, okay, what would happen if these prisoners who were living in this cave for all of their lives were to randomly, without any real reason or cause, become unshackled from their ties to the shackles? What would happen if they were to be untied? What would they do? And this is what Socrates says. When one of them was freed and suddenly compelled to stand up, turn his head, walk, and look up toward the light, he'd be pained and dazzled and unable to see the things whose shadows he'd seen before. What do you think he'd say if we told him that what he'd seen before was inconsequential, but that now, because he is a bit closer to the things that are, and is turned towards things that are more malon onta, that he sees more correctly? Or to put it another way, if we pointed to each of the things passing by, asked him what each of them is, and compelled him to answer, don't you think he'd be at a loss, and that he'd believe that the things he saw earlier were truer, alla testere, than the ones he was now being shown. And if someone compelled him to look at the light itself, wouldn't his eyes hurt? And wouldn't he turn around and flee towards the things he's able to see, believing they're really clearer, sophistera, than the ones he's being shown? So basically, Socrates says if somehow one of the prisoners was enshackled and he was freed, if he was just compelled to stand up and turn his head and look behind him, that it would hurt him. It would physically, in a way, injure him. He would struggle towards seeing, let's say he turns around and sees that big puppet stand with the artifacts, the puppets all doing their things. And again, he's turning towards the light of the fire, right? So it's burning his eyes, right? Because he's never seen anything like this before. Because he's always been doing for his entire life is just looking at this wall of the shadows. Socrates says something interesting. He doesn't say that the prisoner would say, "Oh, look at these things. These things are more real. Wow. And the old things are less real." No, he actually says the reverse. He says, "Oh, these things hurt my eyes. What are these? I'm going to go back to what I've been looking at for my entire life. What the hell is this?" And that's an interesting thing, because if we turn back to Dan's example of this person who goes about in life unquestioning the things that he should question and that are important, then what happens is exactly this kind of thing. When the person is presented with courses of action that he should be taking or signs or indicators that he should stop his behavior, it actually reinforces his behavior to continue doing the things that he's always done. Not to say that people are determined to be always like that, but I'm asking for everyone to think about the nature of the struggle for truth and how hard it is to look towards something look towards a truth that you should be living, but that for some reason you cannot do it.
Just one comment is that when you turn around and see the puppet master was controlling the shadow,
Yeah.
There is a tangible idea that somebody is there, living, creating the shadow on the wall, so it has to be real.
Yeah.
But looking behind me at the light, there's nothing that is controlling that light. There's no figure behind it.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, especially if you're shackled all that time.
Yeah.
When you're looking outside, you don't see anything in control. They could be manipulating that environment.
Right.
Yeah, but you actually see there's another person there manipulating it, so it must be real because I'm real.
So he's actually saying that the shadows are more real than the puppet master. He's saying that puppet master, like there's the fire that's there, and he's saying that if he looks towards this light, that he gets pained and dazzled, and he's unable to see the things. So then Socrates says that. And I highlighted these Greek words because he's doing something that goes against the correspondence theory of truth. He's saying that, and I think that Lynn touched on it, that he's actually believing that the things he saw before the shadows, after he's enshackled and turned toward the puppeteer, he's believing that those are truer. This is the word alethestra, which comes from aletheia, the Greek word aletheia. Aletheia can roughly be translated to unhiddenness, or it can be translated to unconcealment, or it can be translated to givenness. I'm going to stick with unhiddenness. In other words, something is unhiding itself. Something is coming out of its hiding to show us something. But he's saying that he's saying that those things are truer. And in a correspondence theory of truth, you can't say that something is truer. Something's either true or false. And there's another word that he uses. So alethestera can mean truer, or it can mean being full as well. So being full is a very big word, but we'll say words like colorful, right? That's colorful. Wow, look at all the color there. I can say that's being full. Look at all the being there, right?
Like the essence of what it is, like it is whatever it is. It's very much that.
So now you're getting at the, which we will turn to, which is Plato's idea of the good, which will be, I believe, in the next slide. I just want to ask one more question, and this is the question that maybe we've been talking about, is that why does the prisoner decide to return to his shackles?
It's all he knows.
Yeah.
He
Wow.
never knew anything different, and that's the way it is.
Yeah, exactly.
He could have been told anything from birth.
Yeah.
That's what happens. And I've heard this on like TV shows where, they're like, oh, his past was so bad, or his childhood was this, and then the person goes, I didn't know any different. I thought all families did this.
Right.
All families beat their kids, or all families had, whatever happening in their household, when truly it's not all families, it's just what they are brought up to know. So he's brought up to know only the shadows.
Yeah.
And so he's like, well, that's comfort.
Yeah.
I would be skeptical about this if it wasn't for the fact that ever since I became an adult and wanted to know what was true and talk to other people about what I thought was true, and then had reactions. If you're just saying 2 + 2 = 5, it would be really odd for somebody to get emotionally bothered by that, as opposed to just saying, no, here's 2 + 2 = 4.
Right.
And so I've had countless experiences of trying to tell, whether it's about theology or personal relationships or politics or whatever. I say, here's what I think is true, here's what I think is right. And people have they don't like it. And it's just, at first I thought, what a weird reaction to it. But then I realized, it's people like and feel comfortable within their worldview, because again, first of all, for some people, it's all they've ever known, or it provides them obviously some level of comfort, even if it's really backwards, like they're in an abusive relationship.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Isn't that weird?
They're in this condition, and that's all they know.
Yeah.
But do they escape? Rarely.
Right.
They just seem to be comfortable, even though it's not healthy or good. But they don't realize that because that's their truth.
Yeah.
That's
Exactly.
what they do.
We have to break down more what we mean by it is their truth, because we tried to say that this person is not living in distortion, because then they'd just be out of reality. They wouldn't be. So there's a very right. I totally agree. They're totally it's like a simulation. But there's a peculiar thing that Plato's doing here, and this is the bulk of the cave, right? I should have mentioned this at the very beginning, that all these phases that I'm showing you, they have to be understood in a transition. So what I mean is that we're gonna see this prisoner go out of the cave, but we're gonna have to keep in mind that when this prisoner is out of the cave, that his whole history, as Matt was saying, is behind him, so there's some, and then we're gonna get to then that this prisoner, after he goes out into the cave, he's gonna now go back into the cave, but that outside of the cave will be with him as well.
So I don't mind going over time tonight. Like other people don't mind. Like how much left of the presentation? We're like half an hour up.
Yeah, we got about, it's 8:33.
Okay, gotcha.
So,
and then 9 is when we stop, right?
I think we should stop at 9, and the only reason why I'm saying that is because Timothy is not having a great night, and I want to get home. But so it's up to you guys. I would say maybe either we continue this next week, or if you wanted to present next week,
What do you want to do,
I
Matt?
think I would like to kind of get my.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no worries.
Like, idea.
I could continue it to the next week. Actually, that'd be great.
Well, unless you want to like have some wrap up.
What are you next week?
Wrap up thoughts? Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
next time we meet.
Oh yeah, next week I could do. Yeah.
Are you just rescheduling to the following Sunday, or are you gonna
Well,
reschedule to a different day?
Or you guys want to do Monday?
We could do Monday night.
Who can't do Monday?
I don't know yet. Wait, which Monday? This one?
That's the.
Yeah. Do I have that already scheduled? I don't even know.
Can I interject something? Ed?
Yeah, please.
The fear of change.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
I mean, you're talking about abusive relationship. I've heard of people who told me they wanted to get out of it, but they had that fear of the change. Is that comfort though?
Yeah.
It's not comfort when you're in an abusive relationship.
Right, it's not comfortable.
No.
It's their own.
Interesting.
It's not comfort in how we would perceive comfort, you know, on lay on a nice comfy kind of bed.
Or something.
It's
Yes.
comfort in their own head where if they escape, it will be uncomfortable in some way. But not comfort as in down pillows or anything like that.
But I look at our role and things like this. For example, the unchurched people, if we want to lead them from what they know into what we feel they should know. It's not like the old days when you had a pastor in the pulpit pounding his fist down and, thou must do this,
Yeah. Yeah.
And I appreciate a number of years ago when Daniel first started, we went to a workshop and it talked about, taking everybody where they are and then, what was the term we used at that point?
Like,
Loving them and then
Yeah.
giving them or something.
Rick Grayson,
like that.
yeah.
So I'm thinking here scientifically, this person has nothing that he would understand as he's leaving what he knows.
Ah.
And
Yeah.
without somebody teaching him, he wouldn't have a concept of what light is, how it's blocked by solid objects, it casts a shadow, all those kinds of things. Those kinds of things take time. And
I think an important.
about abusive relationships and so on, people have to have interventions to help them with things like that.
I think John had something to say as well.
Yeah, I was just gonna sort of add, like, kind of like what the states just now. It's not just about like having comfort in belief. Like the fear of change comes from, if I've built a sort of support system in this belief and I discard it, then well, I basically have to start over. And not only that, I might not even know where to begin when I'm starting over.
Is that the expression, the devil that you prefer the devil that you know to the devil that you don't know?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's like, yeah, it's a really weird comfort within that fear. The fear is, it could be, I could leave the situation which I want to because it's abusive or whatever, but who knows, it might be even worse if I leave.
Or you could be on the opposite side saying it could get better.
See, that's just it, and that's why it's important to have a church or other friends or family members who can say, I know it's scary, but take one step at a time and it's worth it, So.
Yeah, I think just closing thoughts is that I wanted to provoke. I'll keep on going with the presentation, not now, but next 2 weeks from now. Basically, I wanted to ask, like, what is this beautiful word of emancipation, which is freedom? What is it? What does it mean to be set free towards this light that Plato is hinting on?
Interesting. Leave it cliffhanger.
It's
tense. Yeah.
Important to do.
That's great.
All right. So there's no like balls of water in it.
Probably downstairs. Would you like me to go?
I guess I'll just drink my coffee.
Yeah, for sure. I'll grab a bunch. But I also forgot to turn on, because I didn't realize it was in here. The AC is not on. Just so everybody knows. Next time.
I'm really glad that I appreciate your presentation. Like, I really think it's a perfect segue into, what, and especially the point where you said that history is key. That there's a history too. And when I asked, I didn't even think about that when I thought about the allegory, the history. But you're definitely right about that. And and I think my question when I asked the question, like who are the shadow makers, I think I asked it in a way that it assumed that the shadow makers are always bad. What if the shadow makers had good intentions, right? If these people are shackled, what else can they do? Well,
The gold ring example, right? The person who sells the gold ring thinking it's a gold ring. And
Yeah.
Now they're both tied up in this reality that's false. It's like,
Yeah. No, exactly.
Plus, if you believe something to be true, you tell someone else, and they're like, yeah, that's true. And then that person goes, and again, it's true, and then eventually a whole bunch of people start to believe that gold ring is true, truly 100%
exactly,
gold, and then it's
fool
like,
everyone. Yeah.
and then it's like, okay, it's really counterfeit.
Yeah.
Like, how much can you get for that?
Mhm. I think Dan's coming. There he is.
Yeah, that's a good point though.
I'm going to start showing some pictures to you. So I'm presenting today on Thomas Aquinas. Okay, he is a Catholic theologian, and I'm not Catholic, and I don't think anybody else here. But I think there's a lot we can learn from Thomas Aquinas. You were wearing a bit.
I went through First Communion. That's about it.
Right. Okay.
Then we changed religions.
Right. And you notice something peculiar. Like on one hand, he's holding the scriptures. On the other hand, that's where I got this idea of the church. So the church represents tradition. Scriptures represent scriptures, right? So you have to kind of hold both at the same time, right? Because the problem is if it's just the scripture, if this is the Catholic argument, like this is the Catholic critique of Protestantism, is that if you just have the scriptures, you're always reading anew. There's no sense of the collective wisdom of the church, right? So in a way, it's ahistorical. There's no intellectual heritage, right? And this is the Catholic critique of Protestantism. The Protestant critique of Catholicism would be there's no church, right? Especially when the church was teaching the Bible in Latin and and not in the vernacular, right? So all we had is this monstrous sort of institution that's imposing dogmatically whatever they believe, right? And that's why Thomas Aquinas is holding both. They're both really important. Okay. Okay, so my question to you is, our presentations today are all about truth, right? Someone asks you, what's the real sandwich? Yeah, okay. Why?
Because it's bigger.
It's bigger?
Yeah.
And without lettuce and tomato, it's not a sandwich to
Yeah,
us,
yeah.
but I'll have meat and mustard and bread, I don't care.
But the earth is not a sandwich.
They're both sandwiches.
Yeah, what is that?
I think it was blowing.
Oh, okay. I would too.
I don't think either is a sandwich, they're both images.
Yeah. Oh, hey. Oh, you got a level of sophistication. Yeah. I was actually going to bring some sandwiches with me, but I didn't have time to make it, and I was going to eat it and do this, but it takes up a lot of time to do all the performance. But it's interesting. So, you have people say, oh, yeah, that's the real sandwich, or that's a real man, or it's a real woman for that matter, right? And so the question is, like, is it mere rhetoric? Like, is it simply a semantic? Is it hyperbole, right?
Could be a preference.
Yeah, preference. Yeah, is it something?
Both sandwiches is something between two pieces of something.
Mm-hmm.
It could be bread, it could be lettuce, it could be whatever. It's still a sandwich, right? But it's all based on your preference and what you want.
Yeah. So I mean, if you map it out on here, like maybe you might be this person here. It's more everything is kind of understood, kind of in your own lens.
Yeah.
Right. But anyway. So I'm asking this question because depending on which sandwich you think is more real, you may be more inclined to Thomas Aquinas's thoughts or more inclined to a modern scientific realism. Okay, So modern scientific realism would say that something is or is not, right? This is either a sandwich or it's not, and it's a sandwich, right? So it's in either or. So this modern conception of truth really kind of reduces reality around us to it's either is or isn't, right? It doesn't have kind of this more grandiose conception or more of a robust conception of truth, where truth are degrees of being. And as Christians, it's interesting, we kind of have to think reality is degrees, because we say God is eternal, or God is the highest truth, and we are maybe lower truths. This is common in the way to conceptualize God in a Christian theology. But still, this way of thinking is foreign to our modern understanding of the world. But put yourself in the minds of early Christian thinkers. On the one hand, these Christian thinkers are educated in the best philosophical minds of Greek philosophy, in Plato and Aristotle and the Neoplatonists. The problem that the early Christian thinkers had with Plato and Aristotle is that they present a very elitist philosophy. For Plato, only a handful of people had access to the form of the good, right? And these people were the philosopher kings. Okay, so so on the one hand, we have these philosophies, these elitist philosophies. Plato, he was rich, educated. We have Aristotle, rich, educated, right? But what about the regular people? Okay, so Christianity is trying to synthesize the elitist philosophy with the Israelite religion, the Jewish faith. And what's unique about the Jewish faith is that God is not some unmoved mover that's kind of impersonal, or God is not some form of the good, which is also kind of impersonal. But in the Jewish faith, God is with the people, right? So on the one hand, we have these elitist philosophies, but on the other hand, we have some seemingly primitive monotheism with a God called Yahweh traveling in a tabernacle with what seems to be a nomadic tribe called the Israelites. We also have the teachings of a poor Galilean from Bethlehem who travels with fishermen and dines with tax collectors, prostitutes, and sinners. This Jesus also told Peter to deliver the good news to everybody, not just the elite, to everybody, whether they're rich or poor, Jewish or Gentile. So the early Christian thinkers, particularly Thomas Aquinas, tried to square this elitist philosophy of his day with the experiences of everyday people, which is exemplified with the deep personal relationship that the Israelites had with God. Thomas Aquinas wanted to make these elitist philosophies available to the common person to center the lives of everybody on the good, the true, and the beautiful. But philosophy can't do this alone. What do we get with philosophy? With Aristotle, we get, I'm repeating myself because sometimes I look at my notes, sometimes I don't, and then I end up repeating myself here. And I got to practice these presentations a little bit more. But what do we get with philosophy? With Aristotle, we get an unmoved mover. With Plato, we get a form of the good that sits atop of great chain of being, right? And in the form of the good, it kind of emanates, at least the Neoplatonics, so the people who inherited Plato's philosophy and developed it, they would say that kind of the form of the good is on the top. It's like a fountain where the love emanates down below. But there's no real, and then the people on below, they all kind of appreciate the love. But there's no direct communication from the form of the good to the people. So philosophy doesn't give you this. It needs something else. Before I tell you what that something else is, I have a question for you. What do you guys think? And, okay, I'll just ask. What do you guys really think is the difference between sort of modern philosophy? When I say philosophy, I'm always usually referring to modern philosophy because ancient philosophy is kind of like a mix of both theology and philosophy, right? So it's kind of hard to separate them. But actually, interesting enough, the early Christians always associated theology with paganism. So Christianity, at least from Augustine, was always philosophical. And then theology was always paganism. Interesting side note. But obviously, that's not true today. So what is the difference between modern philosophy and theology? Does anybody want to give it a shot? And there's no right or wrong answer, but It's an important question.
Isn't philosophy based on your own understanding?
Mhm.
Theological would be more based on what actually happened, kind of thing?
Well, a modern philosopher would.
Like in a theory, like
Yeah.
it's hard to put that in the words I want to put it in.
Yeah.
Is it fair to say that modern philosophy is concerned with science in the sense of the definition of truth that we talked about, that you mentioned and that we talked about earlier, which is sort of that which corresponds to reality.
Mhm.
That's what modern philosophy is more so focused on, whereas theology is saying that there's more to it than that. It's not just the way things are, but your experience matters. And so that could be one area of contrast is experience, like your personal experience is a part of theology, whereas in philosophy it can be more cold and abstract.
Yeah, you're definitely right. You're definitely approximating, what I think, or what I think the right answer is. What's interesting when you talk about personal experience is that you're bringing history. When you read Aristotle's philosophy is ahistorical. He kind of summarizes all the philosophers before him, and then he says, okay, well, we don't need to listen to that. We already have the best of that, and we're going to move on. So he doesn't have, and this is a Christian critique of Aristotle's philosophy that Thomas Aquinas tries to develop, is that Aristotle doesn't have a real robust sense of history and a robust sense of truth being disclosed throughout time, right? And Plato maybe has more. Do you want to say something?
I was going to say that philosophy probably is more like you're analyzing something to make sense of it. But in theology, the basic understanding of theology is more of it's already there.
You're right. You're definitely right. That's exactly, and you're definitely right. And it's interesting, even though that not everybody here is professionally trained in philosophy, that you're able to still pick up on these ideas, and you're definitely right about that. My laptop keeps shutting off. So modern philosophy, it starts with skepticism. It starts with doubting everything in order to find one thing that's certain. The famous argument by Descartes. What's his famous argument, Descartes? Come on. I'm talking to John, Dan, or. Yeah, okay. I think, therefore I am. Okay. I think, therefore I am. Now, somebody who is not, so none of you guys, what do you guys think that means? I think, therefore I am.
Well, one aspect that would not based on instinct, like other things that are living, some people say that you have to, be conscious of your actions or what you're doing. But I'm not really sure whether animals think or it's just their instinct that patrols them. But we're actually using our brains for absorption of information.
Awareness.
As opposed to just wandering around and doing things because that's what you do.
Yeah, no, close. So modern philosophy, it starts with skepticism, which means it doubts everything, which means it doubts the lights, it doubts the sandwiches, it doubts all the experience of the world, because I could doubt it. I could simply think that my brain is sitting in a vat, and then scientists are just poking at my brain and then giving me all these sensations. So the goal for modern philosophy is 100% certainty. You have to know the truth, right? So I could doubt the world around us, right? It could be all an illusion, right? So Descartes said, okay, you have to doubt everything, but one thing you can't doubt is that I'm thinking. You can't. How do you doubt that you're thinking? You're just thinking, right? There's immediacy to it, right? So he developed, and then modern philosophy since Descartes tries to develop, okay, I think, therefore I am, and let's just try to build a foundation of knowledge just based on that principle. Yeah.
So Plato had a phrase, I think this comes up in Theaetetus, I think it's to auto kyoto kenon, which is soul as self-moving motion. And that's what I instantly think about when I think about theology. I think about, I think you'd be able to explain this, maybe this sort of presentation going about how we participate in reality.
Yeah.
But you have to ask, when I say how we participate, it's more like how my soul or how my spirit participates in reality and the way in which that moves itself. When we use the phrase "I moved," right? I feel moved. I feel that moved me. What do we mean when we say that? That's kind of interesting. Well, but that's what Plato was trying to look at that in regards to the good, actually.
Yeah, you're right. And then, both Plato and Aristotle are trying to develop how change happens, any kind of change. If something changes, is it completely transformed, right? And, like I'm not planning on going into all the metaphysics because it's incredibly complicated. But anyway, yeah, like it is about motion. This computer. But let's just, because I don't have much time, I'm going to try to just shotgun it, okay? So modern philosophy starts with skepticism. Okay? Theology starts with conviction, okay? It doesn't start with skepticism. It starts with conviction. It starts with trust. It starts with, like what you said, what's given. I don't need to doubt to live life. I need to believe. I need to trust in people. I need to trust in the world around us. So theology starts with the faith needed to engage in our social and historical contexts. This faith is not a certainty, like the kind of certainty desired by Descartes. This faith is the courage to step out into the unknown of this world, to allow our being to participate in the being of the world. This faith allows us to reach out into the world and receive it as a gift. Okay, so theology, it starts exactly with what's given, and for Plato and Aristotle too, like they're trying to appropriate. How do I phrase it? Where's my marker? Okay. There's the chair. Okay. So the problem with modern philosophy, it seems to doubt everything and then ask, well, okay, how do you get from the mind to the world, like to perceive the chair, right? So modern philosophy, it starts with this rift, right? But pre-modern, so more ancient philosophy from Plato, Aristotle, whatnot, it doesn't start with this. It begins with an assumption that the world around us, we have immediate access to it, right? It's just simply assumed, right? It could be doubted, though. That's the scary thing. We could be wrong about the world around us, right? But that's why we need a concept like grace or faith that gives us a courage to step out into the unknown, to take a risk, right? To build a relationship with somebody. Okay. Well, say if you meet somebody, you fall in love, okay, this person might be the right person. There might be evidence that this is the right person that I'm supposed to fall in love with and get married. You could be wrong, right? But faith, at least in the Christian view, it's worth taking the risk. So it's not the absence of evidence. It's evidence, but incomplete.
Is it touching upon the contrast between optimism and pessimism?
Yeah. I think it is a lot more optimistic. Like, it's not nihilistic.
Right.
The reason why Nietzsche, I mean, if you disregard these basically Christian insights, you're going to end up with Nietzsche, and you're going to end up, okay, well, complete nihilism, meaninglessness, and I got to try to create something on my own, right? But what grounds this faith for Thomas Aquinas is divine revelation, particularly what's written in the scriptures. What the Bible provides philosophy are basic theological categories that organize history and a cosmic narrative of creation, fall, and redemption. For those that think that one sandwich is more real than the other, what we are saying is that one sandwich triggers a recollection. So Plato, a recollection of divine perfection in creation. But it also triggers an anticipation of the perfection in redemption. Okay, so a being isn't just simply there. Okay, that there or is not there. There is a sense in our encounter with a being. There's always an anticipation of what it could be, right? And okay, let me continue. What grounds this recollective and anticipatory perfection in the being of the sandwich is the image of perfection in the mind of God. right? So God's mind is always perfect. All the images of God's mind is perfect. For Aquinas, it's not just this sandwich, but all things are striving for this kind of perfection emanated out from the mind of God. Okay, so that's the sandwich, but what makes, on the Christian view, what makes people unique? Right? What sets us apart from a sandwich or any other object? Anybody?
That we make decisions.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, sandwich is not making any decisions.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Let's hope.
That we have experience and preferences.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
But what about, say, higher order objects like animals? Like, for example, dogs can have preferences. Maybe
Yeah.
your dog prefers a certain kind of food over another. And what's kind of interesting too, like, so someone like Aristotle would say that, well, animals basically weren't sentient, and humans are. So, but we wouldn't really say that's true anymore.
But there is something, and maybe we don't know the answer to this, or maybe the answer is found in God, and that is this, that what separates us, because we are animals and mammals, right? So what separates us between other mammals, right? Well, we have this capacity to morally judge, like to say there is such a thing as right and wrong. And if somebody says no, there isn't, it's like, okay, go ahead, live your life, see if that works at all. Like, what's more, like there seems to be, we have the capability of recognizing something higher than other animals can.
Yeah. And like Aristotle and even Thomas Aquinas, like they would say that animals have souls too. That any soul is kind of like life. It's the animated sort of life, right? So their conception of soul is, ours is just simply more real. I think that's how they would say it. Our soul, like the sandwiches, our souls are more real because our souls are more like the real God Himself, right? But let me.
Also, too, in a retrospect of that, it's like in Scripture it does state that God made us in His image. He did not make every creature living on earth in His image. Just humans.
Just humans, yeah, exactly. And you're right. So the answer is humans are made in the image of God. Sunday school answer, right?
You could take the animal living in Plato's cave or whatever, right?
Yeah.
That they don't have any other choice by what is given to them,
That's right.
Mhm.
That's right.
right?
Yeah.
There's
I like
no
that. Yeah.
choice for them.
So they're kind of
No
changed.
choice.
They're not
They're
actually
changed.
going out and shopping for their
I like
Yeah.
this one
Yeah,
better.
but they're always bound. And whereas we have that chance.
Freedom of choosing.
Yeah.
We're the guy on the outside of the cave who gets to walk around.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm just got distracted. But anyway, great conversation. I want to just quickly wrap this up. So we're made in the image of God. What does this mean? This means that there's something about the way we come to know the world around us that imitates the way God knows His created order. Okay. For Aquinas, what makes us like God is that we can know the truth about the world. But what kind of truth are we talking about here? Are we talking about some bland correspondence of mind and the world? Something in our mind corresponds to reality that may or may not exist. No, to know the truth about the world, we need to know that the world was created. So you have to assume, for Christianity, for Thomas Aquinas, you have to assume the Christian worldview for his system to make sense. If you don't, it's not really going to make sense, but there's problems. Then if it doesn't make sense, you're going to lose out on truth, goodness, and beauty, right? So anyway, let me continue here. No, to know the truth about the world, we need to know that the world is created as a place for us to contemplate the truth about the world. We need to assume, like Aquinas, that the doctrine of creation given by revelation, which tells us that the truth of something is its striving to be what God intended it to be. In this sense, truth is not an idea in our mind. Truth is an event. It is a disclosure. It's revelation. Okay, and this is what Aquinas and other philosophers would say when Jesus says, "I am the truth." He's not saying that he's an idea supposed to be in your mind. He literally is the truth, right? And his presence is the event in history that we can encounter. We can encounter truth, beauty, and goodness in Christ. So for Aquinas, it's not, interesting enough, it's not our capacity to think. It's not our capacity to use scientific methods to investigate the world around us that makes us like God. It's our capacity to encounter the beings of this world and to both recollect and anticipate divine perfection in these beings. This is what connects the true and the beautiful. In other words, we are most like God in our aesthetic judgment. Okay, it's a little bit complicated to explain. Let's use an illustration of what I mean by aesthetic judgment. Okay, you ever notice like a beautiful woman or a beautiful man for that matter? Okay, you instantly judge that person to be beautiful, right? You can go on and say, oh, well, there's symmetry and all these other explanations, but I don't need those explanations to know, boom, they're beautiful. There's this immediate sense, an immediate aesthetic judgment that, boom, they're beautiful, right? And it's not just, men and women, it's the world around us, immediate sense of judgment. So Thomas Aquinas has this doctrine called the doctrine of divine simplicity. So God is simple. And what that means is that he's not made of parts. It also means that God's thinking and judging and acting are all the same. We are finite human beings, so we have to think before we judge and before we act. But God, he's infinite. He doesn't have to think. He doesn't have to analyze. He doesn't need science. He simply knows. So us imitating God is not a discursive thinking through of things. It's immediate knowing, right? And it's more like an aesthetic judgment than it is a scientific procedure. Is everybody kind of following me what I'm saying here? I
just wanted to add that Plato thinks that he thinks that the good is an idea, and if you trace the etymology of idea, it goes to idean, which means to see, but really it actually means to look. It's to look at something as something. So for example, like this water bottle here, I'm not just seeing, what's visible for me is not just, I'm not just perceiving the parts that are made of this water bottle, but quite literally I'm seeing the water bottle as the water bottle. And that's the most important point, that the way in which that comes to me, that the look of that thing is what he ties idean, which means to see, and then nous, which means to perceive, the visible.
You're right. And it sounds very phenomenological, right? But the difference is that there's a surplus, right? So like the sandwich idea, the sandwich is beautiful because we anticipate more of a perfection, right? That this sandwich is actually striving for perfection in the world around us. And there's a surplus that goes beyond like Husserlian phenomenology, right?
So you're saying that surplus is kind of manifesting.
Yeah, well, I mean,
it's manifesting beyond the thing itself.
Yeah, exactly. And that's because we, as image bearers of God, we can perceive, however dimly, things striving for divine perfection. And it sounds kind of obscure, but if you think of our day-to-day, because I always like to bring these concepts down to day-to-day life, like the sandwich. It's like there is a certain trivial sense in which we think one sandwich is more true than another. Well, what is that? Well, anyway, I got 2 minutes and it's done. But the Greeks have aesthetics as well. What makes a Christian aesthetic unique is that because all things in some manner anticipates perfection, even the ugly becomes beautiful. Beauty for the Greeks becomes a passing illusion because it fades away. That's why they celebrated the youth, because it's fleeting, it fades away, it's illusory. In Christianity, beauty is eternalized in the mind of God, and the operations of our intellect anticipate the beauty of even something as lowly as a worm. Right? This is also what makes the cross of Christ hold both the ugly and the beautiful in a single act of divine aesthetic judgment. Only in Christianity or on a Christian aesthetic can suffering become the beautiful. What do you guys?
That's fantastic. I mean, that's why Paul said the gospel is foolishness to Greeks, because we're talking about supposedly what we're saying is, a king dying a horrible death on a cross, but in that is the most amazing display of love and giving of yourself, sacrifice that there ever has been or ever will be. And so you're right, the Christian worldview is we can see beauty in ugliness. The cross is supposed to be ugliness. Like we use it as a symbol, but it literally, historically is a execution, a method, which, so again, to a Gentile Greek mind, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But it's actually the most beautiful thing because it's the Son of God giving of himself to show us how to enter into something better.
Yeah, and you're right. And you know what? Like, even though, if you're not Christian and you're hearing these things, yeah, I mean, sometimes when online as a hobby, I kind of engage with atheists online, and then I start asking questions that kind of throw them curveballs. It's like, okay, how can an atheist really develop a robust aesthetics that can find something true and real in art, right? And they tell me, oh, well, I'm interested in art, but it is always like a passing curiosity. It's always like a hobby. It's not something that actually discloses truth and reality, right? So the question is, okay, so do you want to adopt a worldview that has a kind of inflated or deflated conception of truth, beauty, and goodness? Well, then, okay, we'll embrace some kind of secular thought. Okay, but if you want a robust conception of truth, beauty, and goodness, one that actually, I was reading an article the other day about how these Chinese girls and Korean girls to, what their parents get them for their birthday, or their graduation? Plastic surgery. Yeah, it's sad. And maybe if they, in China, they had a little bit of a dose of Thomas Aquinas philosophy, maybe a girl can look in her mirror and actually say, hey, there's an intellectual foundation. It was not just cheap cliche. There's a robust, best philosophical minds, at least in the West, that says, hey, I'm beautiful, right? And I can see divine perfection in me, and other people can see it too.
Isn't it odd that, not to step on any toes, like leftist, feminist types really talk down about the West and Christianity and so on, whereas within that tradition is actually everything that would give, what would you say, like worth to a woman, for example. That we don't, as a Christian, I don't hold that a woman's beauty, outside beauty, is all that there is to her. I can find in a woman, in my wife, like beauty inside too. And that comes from the Christian and Western idea that beauty is not just superficial, right?
Yeah, and it's not just women, right? It's men, it's anything. Yeah. And as image bearers, we imitate God in our aesthetic judgments, and the product of that is seeing the beautiful, but also creating the beautiful, creating works of art that transforms what's ugly into something that's redemptive, right? So, any last questions?
That's great.
Okay. Thanks for your patience.
All right, actually, 15 minutes, but we did it.
Yeah, sorry about that. So, I guess, we're just not going to meet next week.
Yeah, I would say let's just not meet next week. Give ourselves a break. If anybody's interested, there's still tickets for this concert that we're going to. It's going to be great. So come talk to me if you want to come, and if you haven't already bought a ticket. But thanks for coming tonight, everyone. We appreciate it. Let's stay in touch. If you're not on, if you are on Facebook or social media, come find us. Let's stay in touch throughout the week. Okay. God bless you. We'll see you again next time. Yeah, if you don't mind picking up your chair and bringing it back.
What's that?
Live stream.
Yeah.
Right?